Seth, happy belated Thanksgiving, buddy.
Happy belated Thanksgiving to you. We're kind of rounding out this holiday weekend in separate parts of the country once again.
That's
But
right.
glad to be back virtually at least.
Where are you at these days, man? You're definitely on the East Coast. I know that.
Yes, just Southern Rhode Island for another day or so, and then I'll be back in Chicago for tomorrow and for next episode, more importantly. So I'll be back in the lab. But
And
this is
then,
the
and
road
how
trip.
was it, buddy? Was a master of the grill, or did you just sit back and let mom feed you?
Yeah, we outsourced this one. I enjoyed it. I got my full and I crashed on the couch, but I can't say I was much of a contributor this year. So.
Oh, no, that's the best, man. I tell you, as we get older, dude, outsourcing is the way to go. But I got to tell you, I always say that I'm excited, right? Every time, if you go back and listen to a podcast, I'm really excited about this episode. I'm really excited about it. So, but honestly, guys, I'm very excited about this one. And Seth, you know why? You know why I'm excited about this. I've been waiting to do it, and I wanted to not start off with this episode because it may turn people away.
We had to build a strong fan base who follows us through thick and thin. But no surprise, Scott. Obviously, with your background, you are very passionate about this particular topic, and so I'm excited that you're excited, and maybe a kind of a bit of a dynamic change where I'm going to have probably more questions than usual because this is somewhat new territory to me. But happy to kind of talk it through and learn some things from you today.
Yes, well, I am a big fan of books, right? This is a dying art. All right, Seth, at my age now, when I go to a coffee shop with an actual book and I don't bring my phone, like they call the police, they call security. They're like, "What are you doing, dude? Like this looks illegal. You're just sitting here with a book, like
We,
an
we don't know
actual book."
why this is wrong, but we just feel it is. It just doesn't pass the smell test. But
This is where it went from the cool bachelor to the creep, right? It's that ambiguity, like, yeah, we don't know about this guy. We
we
better
can't
call.
possibly just be reading a book. There's no way, so we must be up to something more.
Well, but this is where the bridge. So today's episode is all about songs that are inspired by literature, by books. Okay, so this bridges those things that I do reading these books and then how it carries over it in songs that people play in modern times and today. And I got to tell you, I took a lot of heat, Seth. You know, when you and I were roommates, I used to read Game of Thrones, right? This is way back before it was on TV. And these books had all the corny covers with the swords and dragons. Everyone was giving me a hard time. And then it comes out on HBO, and then everyone's a fan. And that's where I feel like I'm getting my revenge here on this
I would
episode.
agree. I have to say, I was skeptical, but you did call your shot on that one. So I really have I don't have much to say. So you're right on.
Well, most songs, a lot of them are about relationships, about love. They're about good times, bad times, and a lot of these songwriters and artists get their inspiration from these personal experiences, but a lot, and that's what we're going to go through today, come from stories, from characters, from novels. And these are songs that are massively popular. And I wanted to go into these, Seth. And I know, uh, I'm a voracious reader and whatnot, but these are songs that I am sure that you know and love, and I can't wait to tell you where they come from.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about it. It's kind of interesting. It seems on one hand a little bit not unusual, but you're like, oh, that's weird, a song inspired by a book. But it's almost unusual that it doesn't happen more because if you think about how many movies or how many
Yep.
TV shows, like there's so much emphasis placed on kind of existing IP, whether it's um, something having a built-in fan base or just something that has sort of like it's already been validated because people are interested and engaged in the story, whether it's a myth from 1,000 years ago, or whether it's a book that came out 5 years ago. Given how much source material there is, and given how much story building there is
Yeah.
on the literature side, it's actually kind of interesting that it doesn't creep into music more, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, throughout these, let's say, top 25 songs, there's actually a couple books that have had a massive impact on a lot of songs, ranging from even like Taylor Swift to Iron Maiden. And I got to start off with the band that has the most references to high literature. Let's call that. What do you know? It's Metallica.
The artists themselves. Yeah.
The ultimate self. I got to tell you, this is not was it was surprising. right? Because the literature is actually quite advanced. All right, this isn't you would call it John Grisham novels. These aren't those novels you read on planes, right? The 999, like Scooby-Doo episodes.
Mystery of the month. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them, for example, For Whom the Bells Toll. I'm just going to list through some of these, Seth, and tell me if you know of these songs. But there's For Whom the Bells Toll, which is based on Hemingway's novel about the Spanish Civil War. Amazing, really good song. It's on the Ride the Lightning album, their second album after Kill 'Em All. An incredibly powerful song based on a really cool book. For those of you that haven't read Hemingway, if I could start being a little professor here, it's a great novel. That's all I'm saying. Or just watch the movie and you'll be out of there.
I was going to say that I believe they've also made that one into a feature film for those who are not quite ready to dive in. But I mean, it's interesting too. We'll dig in, and we'll talk more about Metallica, but like the range of types of literature, where it comes from, how old it is, what the subject matter is. There's really a pretty wide range, but you can definitely tell certain bands that migrate towards certain genres or certain authors.
Exactly.
Like that, right?
Exactly. You'll see some, even the personalities, as we'll get into the actual literature. Some of these artists like Sting, who was before the Police, was actually in education as an associate professor, I believe. And so well-read. These people are just brilliant in many different aspects. David Bowie, a huge George Orwell fan who wrote 1984, really influenced a lot of his work. And literally direct references. But I thought Metallica was one leading the list here. And one of their first, growing up in the 80s, Seth, Metallica was actually very mysterious, right? Before they started shopping on Rodeo Drive. And they waited to release their first video, and it was called One. And this was on the album Justice for All. And it's entirely based on a book by Dalton Trumbo called Johnny Got His Gun. And for those, it's an anti-war novel written in the 30s, after World War I, and is insanely graphic. Essentially, it's about a guy who loses his arms and his legs, and he can't see and he can't hear. And it's an incredibly powerful, like, dude, that's you got. It sucks, man. It just sucks to be
heavy topic. Yeah,
it's a heavy topic, and their whole a video is interplay between them playing live and actually the 1971 adaptation of the book. So it's a very powerful book, and it drove this whole song entirely, the whole song. As well as you have The Call of Cthulhu, which is H.P. Lovecraft's science fiction, which is based on basically on another book by Odyssey by Homer, going old school, Seth, really old school, one of the first books ever written. So Metallica is going back to Greek classics, to anti-war, and that's the funny thing, a lot of this, they're seen as this kind of like America, but actually there's songs like Master and Puppets, and a lot of their music is very, very let's say establishment, anti-government in many ways. And a lot of those books were just brilliant. And so I really give Metallica a lot of credit for that.
And do you have a sense, Scott, I'm just curious, what was it their love of literature that caused them to sort of like have that be the main inspiration? Do you think it's like a songwriting credibility thing? I'm curious what, for seemingly a band whose style seems so not, I don't know, like the lyrical structure could be very basic. Why do you think they were drawn to those as inspiration? Like, do you think it truly was like they just are really voracious readers themselves, or do you think that was like such visual imagery, it fit what they wanted to do with the music? I'm curious what drew them to that.
That's a good question. I think, for example, with Metallica, I know that James Hetfield grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian home in I think Brea, near Los Angeles. And a lot, if you read the Bible, it's like the original epic stories. And I think that really influenced, when you read it's a heavy literature. It's actually very difficult to read. And I think those stories translate into other epic stories, such as Homer's The Odyssey or science fiction. And I think they just provide such imagery. So I don't think, for example, even with Led Zeppelin, let's talk about some of their inspiration. They get into a certain author,
Yeah.
So that's really what it is. It's almost like artists are creative and they may look at painters for inspiration or directors, movie directors. But what I've seen and based on my research is that they're not like, hey, I'm a lover of books. I think there's a couple that are, but more or less they're into a genre.
Yeah.
And then that genre is, like Iron Maiden has a lot of book references and they're like epics, there's war, there's famine. It's kind of this death and destruction. And there's certain authors, science fiction authors, that kind of correlate to that like vibe,
Yeah. I'm almost thinking like when you hear a new artist, I think people's brain often goes towards like what influences do I hear? And
Totally.
it's more of a sound thing, more of a
Yeah.
musical. Like, what are your clearly you can hear a little bit of this band in there and a little bit of that. You're sort of drawing from
Yeah.
these influences, but especially at first listen, I don't think people are digesting the lyrical content of most, certainly not in rock, maybe more so in like
Yeah.
hip hop, but that's it for most artists, that's a lower priority than sonically how does it sound, right? So maybe
Yeah.
people are pulling those references out more quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm sure, the same way that bands are influenced by how other bands sound, how other bands play, they're also influenced by the storytelling that they find within music and outside of music, and that follows
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah,
Exactly. And we alluded to it earlier, but Led Zeppelin to me was one of the most brilliant artists to integrate fantasy with like Southern blues in a way that's almost seamless. And you don't even know that they just weaved in characters from Lord of the Rings, for example. That to me, and I remember when I was huge into Zeppelin, and that got me into Tolkien. And the references, for those who don't know, the song Ramble On, Misty Mountain Hop, Battle of Evermore are all based on the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien's, famous fantasy series. And Seth, I think I was mentioning it to you. I don't know if you heard it before or if I was so excited to tell you what that song meant.
yeah. I was sort of aware. How do I want to say it? I think I knew certainly Ramble On pretty early on, even like before Lord of the Rings, the movies all happened, like just
Yeah.
from books when I was younger. But I didn't realize how pervasive it was. Like it influences like their album cover art. It influences multiple songs, and I think it's just like it's a little tough to square in my brain. And this is not a knock, but it's honest. Is like how they're like the coolest, nonchalant, hippest band. Like we just do whatever the fuck we want, and then they're also like big Tolkien nerds. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't square. Although I
Yeah.
sort of the epicness of their music aligns with the epicness of those stories. So I get that
Yeah.
piece, but it's still like, oh yeah, Led Zeppelin has like a bunch of songs that are based on Hobbit stuff. I'm just like, that feels odd to me, to be
Well,
honest. So,
yeah, and I thought what was interesting about Zeppelin, for example, who are obviously heavily influenced by Tolkien, as I mentioned, these three songs, is that they put them in. So if you look at Metallica or Iron Maiden or some of these kind of heavy metal or hard rock, the songs will sound exactly like the descriptions of the novel, right? If it's a battle scene or the Rime of the Ancient Mariner from Iron Maiden, it sounds like you read the book and it's a linear interpretation of it. But Led Zeppelin made it sound like these characters, such as Frodo or Bilbo, these characters, for those of you who are Lord of the Rings, those are the two big characters in The Hobbit, but in like a Southern kind of blues environment. So there's an example. It goes, in the darkest depths of Mordor, I met a girl so fair, but Gollum, the evil one, crept up and slipped away with her, and ain't nothing I can do. And and the song has a bluesy instruments. Almost you think it's in the deep South. Yet
yeah.
there's Bilbo and talking about Gollum, So it's like I thought that was just brilliant. Or a song like Misty Mountains, right? In the Misty Mountains, this is where Bilbo and his gang and the Hobbit all hung out, trying to get the dragon, right, and his gold. But it just sounds like a fun like party place, So I'm packing my bags, going to Misty Mountain,
Yes. You could, I also think fair to say, Scott, like there's the added layer that if you know the books, you get a lot
Yeah,
out of it. You're like, wow, this is
yeah,
so cool. But for someone like me, I could listen to those songs 20 times and enjoy it. And like you said, almost have a symbolic place that it represents and not even know they're a Lord of the Rings reference, right?
yeah,
Which is that they're written more vaguely enough. Maybe the last one, maybe Ramble
yeah.
On is pretty specific. But it's like, yeah, like you said, it just sounds like this fun, what it could be anything. It's not when it's almost stranger
Yeah.
for someone like me when you find out it's actually a pretty specific reference.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. I mean, for many people, they've listened to the song for decades and they didn't even know the reference. You just kind of hear these Gollum. You're not quite as sure what that means, and it's just kind of in the back of your mind. But one artist that you love, Seth, Bruce Springsteen, based a whole song on an iconic character from an iconic book from an iconic author. We're talking about the Ghost of Tom Joad.
Yes, and I know there's he was not the first musical artist to reference that character in a story. I think there's maybe a Pete Seeger song or
Yeah.
one of those early folk songs. Like thematically, that does go back to again like the Dust Bowl, the 30s, like a very specific time and place visually that fit what he was trying to do. Kind of not. It was post Nebraska album, but it was sort of like in that same like world creation that Springsteen is so good at. And instead of being a story about someone, in a factory town in the 80s, it's in a like migrant workers in the 30s. Like it's pulling that same sort of like plight of the worker type thing into it, and perfectly consistent with how Springsteen writes.
Exactly. And for those of you, this is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, written about the basically the migration from Oklahoma to California. Very powerful novel. And the Tom Joad is this kind of hero. He's the kind of antagonist of the story. Amazing movie with Henry Fonda, and an amazing book. So, and a great artist. I mean, it's a whole. You're getting the World Series right there, man. Everything.
And that's another one. You almost wonder, like, obviously, he's a guy who I think is reasonably well read, but you even like this. It would be interesting to like how did he come upon that story? Was he aware of it and drew inspiration from it? Did someone say, hey, like this, I could almost see someone be like, how you write reminds me how Steinbeck writes, like kind of in terms of the characters that you're pulling out, the people you're writing about. Was he like, oh, wow, that's interesting, and sort of like found deeper inspiration? Was he aware of it? Like how they come to this and how they decide to integrate it into their music. So, I mean, that's pretty plain. The name of the song is the literary character you're referencing.
Well,
I'm always interested in that.
You think about it, a lot of these books, and for many of us, we read them, a part of our high school or junior high curriculum, right? Or your first year in college, right? This top 20 great works everyone's reading, To Kill a Mockingbird. And then you kind of read it, you get through it, and then you don't read about it anymore. And so for some of these artists that maybe even didn't go to school, you're like, how did they pick up a classic? Stuff that, even like the Odyssey. I mean, that stuff's, it's not easy to read, yet so many songs are based on it. One that we love is the Beatles. And this is a classic story of John Lennon going into a bookstore, I think a very progressive one in London, and picking up The Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary, who was a Harvard professor in the 50s and 60s, and then wrote Tomorrow Never Knows, one of the most landmark songs of all time.
Which is another one where it's not necessarily like there is direct, like I'm pretty sure that almost all of the lyrics are pulled like word for word from the what was the original book, Scott? Remind me.
It is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Is what and I read both. And it's literally where it says, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. And it goes, you are not dying. Give, I think, surrender. Oh, there's a perfect line. Surrender to the void. That's one of the opening lines that I think John Lennon read in the Timothy Leary book, which, and so you read it and you're like, and that's what I would just tell people, like, man, these books are very powerful, that so much they influenced John Lennon, who made,
and that's one of them where it's not even like, they pulled some thematic, like I actually read, I think it's officially like a poem from that book.
Exactly.
And it is, with a few exceptions to make it flow better, it's like 97% word for word.
Exactly.
That poem. And not only obviously is the lyrical content directly pulled from that, but sonically, that's actually one that is pretty specific, where it's like the themes and the like I think it was like he wanted it to sound like 1,000 monks chanting from a mountaintop or something like that. So it's not only the words, but even the sound of the song is influenced by the themes of the book. And so that's a great example of how, and again, at a very formative time for the Beatles, right? They were kind of moving from their early phase to their late phase. And it's a rare time when they did clip something so wholesale, you know what I mean? Take words like that. Yeah.
But you could just imagine he goes and he's, he heard about all this happenings going out in the Haight-Ashbury and at Harvard, goes into a bookstore, picks up a book that he's heard about, reads a couple pages, buys it, writes one of the most famous songs of all time. Like it's really, I just find it incredible. And another example of a song that just blatantly calls out the title is Tom Sawyer by Rush.
And I will say, I've always gotten the sense of like that we've goofed on it before, but that genre in particular,
yeah,
has a lot of people who have spent a lot of times in basements reading books, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like
They're nerds.
like that prog rock, like the musically, it's very advanced and very sort of esoteric. And I think oftentimes, I mean, Tom Sawyer is not exactly esoteric, but no surprise that there's no shortage of sort of literary reference in that world.
Rush, the king of nerds, right? We love them. I love Rush, but they're nerdy in the best way. Their song Anthem, which was by Ayn Rand, a book called Anthem. There's Rivendell, which is where the elves lived. That's from Lord of the Rings. So they're hanging out with Led Zeppelin, of course. And then you have Tom Sawyer and the lyric. No, his mind is not for rent to any god or government. And this is based on the character of Tom Sawyer, for those of you who know, written by Mark Twain. Grew up about 4 hours from here on the Mississippi. And I actually said I went there to pay homage and I saw the white fence, right? This is this famous story where
the white fence.
Mark Twain got his inspiration from this white fence. And all of a sudden, it goes all the way to Rush. So there's the full circle, Seth.
And I was going to say, and it also kind of funny, it's such an American story, an American South story. And Rush, of course, famously not American, but, Canadian. And it's funny, to relate to that story shows you sort of the central themes of it are like, it's on the backdrop of the American South, but there's actually a lot of kind of like deeper, being rebellious, being sort of like defiant of authority. That resonates with people. You don't need to live in Mississippi to have that story click with you.
Totally right. I mean, the character is iconic. As we mentioned earlier, a little bit about David Bowie. David Bowie was so influenced by George Orwell in his books Animal Farm, and especially 1984, that he actually went to the foundation or the George Orwell estate and wanted to do a whole musical with his songs, Big Brother, which is this all-seeing eye on 1984, as well as the song 1984, which is. So many people have heard of this reference. I don't know if many people read it, but it's especially relevant today.
Kind of when you say like, oh, it's like something out of 1984. People know what it means and sometimes misunderstand what it means.
Yeah.
But, no surprise, Bowie was sort of early on that. Like, I think that once again, sort of thematically consistent with the way he sees the world, and no surprise that those are the books that resonated with him.
Definitely.
And that would have been fascinating to see an actual musical come of it at some point, but
exactly. And I think I don't know if Seth, if you and I saw that movie together, The Man Who Fell to Earth.
We did.
See that? Yeah, that's right. Back in the day. Well, so you can see you got a very science fiction, very progressive imagination. I mean, his music is progressive, and these novels are, science fiction in essence. But I got it.
Storytelling, I think that a lot of, like, deciding on sort of like for this album, this is a character I'm going to play, and I'm going to write songs sort of in the voice of that character. So he's almost got like a lyrical writing style. Like, an album is a novel. I'm the main character, and I'm going to build a story for, even if it's not like literally a concept album, it's something close to it. And so once again, no surprise that a guy like that finds much more in common with great writers rather than maybe like musical peers sometimes when it comes to lyrics.
Exactly. I think with the book and the novel, you can be so descriptive, and so these characters are so deep that it's like I feel like I relate to him, or a piece to him, a piece of that character, and I want to talk about it. Because especially Tolkien, I think that's why he's so prevalent, is because he paints a world. So if you touch that world, for many people, it's very powerful. I know for me personally, it was, because sometimes you want to be in that world than this world. And so I think that sense of escape, it's perfect material. But I got to tell you, Seth, I won't say the nerdiest guy, but one that is in the highest literature, almost philosophy, is Sting of the Police, who has, and I had to actually do some research, and I learned some stuff that I didn't know, but he goes from the extent of like the song "Don't Stand So Close to Me," which is based on Nabokov's Lolita, which is about a guy kind of in love with a younger girl, very young girl. It's really cool reference. But then he goes into the whole album Synchronicity. So in 1983, they launched their biggest album yet, which is based on Carl Jung's, who was a Swiss psychiatrist, on this almost a philosophical principle of synchronicity, that things don't just happen at a coincidence. It's all linked. And subsequently, the album previous was Ghost in the Machine, which was Arthur, I'll remember his last name, but it's all about this kind of dystopian society, which was based on Carl Jung. So Sting is all about this very complex philosophy, but in really pop songs, right?
Yes, and I was gonna say, and it's flowed through even to his post-police songs and work, and even just lifestyle. I mean, he's a guy that's sort of, synonymous with like meditation and tantric, whatever. Like he's got sort of
9 hours of tantric sex, right? Was that Seth?
So like 8 hours, like hard pass, but whatever. That is like anyway, that's sort of interwoven into his personality. So really no surprise that he kind of goes a little more deep and philosophical than most, but does it within the structures of a 3-minute pop song. And that's probably not easy to do, to distill down these very high concepts and theories and things that you've sort of chosen to frame your life around a bit, or at least agree with philosophically, and turn it into something that's like very commercial. I think that's his sort of secret sauce.
It is. It's unbelievable. If anyone, the Police's most famous album is Synchronicity, right? And the title track Synchronicity is actually Synchronicity 1 and Synchronicity 2. But the first one, the lyrics read from the book of Carl Jung. So it says a connecting synchronicity, a connecting principle linked to the invisible. I mean, those are actually taken directly from, which is for many people, very complex philosophy.
Not exactly like reading if you decide to like, let me learn more. And you get to like, you're like, okay.
The one band that's not on here is Limp Bizkit. I didn't see any references to Florida Rock. There was no.
We get to lay off them though, but yeah.
No, I was just saying, like, there are some people that were not on the list, but some. And Seth, you know who my favorite band is of all time. We're talking about Steely Dan, and I just want to tell our audience here, this is how it affects our lives, right? When Seth and I say we love music and whatnot, Seth and I started a company called Mesh and Bone, which is all about exotic alcohol. And we had drinks from around the world. And so Seth and I went on this sourcing for a couple years to go find cool stuff. Well, in this song, Home at Last by Steely Dan, off their 1977 Asia album, there's that song Home at Last is all about like a jazzy interpretation of Odysseus, who is the main character in the Odyssey. And he's about going home after the battle in Troy. And on his way home, he has all these adventures. And one of them, he gets caught on this island in the Calypso. And the lady serves him this special drink called Retsina, which is an ancient Greek drink that is still drank today. And so I ended up going all the way to Athens to go try this drink. And it was horrible, but it came from that song, which came from the book. So there you go, Seth.
So Steely Dan sending you on your own odyssey to go figure out if this stuff is worth actually building a business around. So I'm glad you did the due diligence. We're all about we're all about doing our homework, and that was homework worth doing. But I'm glad we landed on the ones we did. But thank you anyway.
It's amazing. Again, like you would hear a blues interpretation of old literature and then a jazz rock infused of the Odyssey. And then there's some albums here and some artists like Green Day, who have a song on their Kerplunk album in 91 called Who Wrote Holden Caulfield, which is a reference to Catcher in the Rye, the main antagonist there. There's many others here. One that I got to tell you, Seth, that is my favorite is it's from the Talk Talk, which is an 80s band. I don't know if you heard it, called It's My Life.
Yes,
If
because that song later got covered by No Doubt, right? And became very
yes,
popular. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Almost
So,
in not only covered, but like covered note for note. Like it really is a pretty much like if you've heard the No Doubt version, you've basically heard the
yes,
original version. It's pretty shot for shot.
that's exactly right. And so one of their songs is called "Such a Shame." Is based on one of the most freaky books of all time called The Dice Man by Luke Reinhardt. And I'm just going to tell everyone this is a cult book. So if you go on Google, type in The Dice Man, right? It has a whole following. And I read this book, Seth, and it is bizarre. Um, it is about a guy, I'll just tell you that, who instead of fate, he rolls dice. So a quick story is like, should I have an affair on my wife? If he rolls an 8, he has to do it. And he goes all the way. And so he lives his life by rolling dice. So any decision that comes, and it's crazy. So some of the lyrics of the song are that the dice decides my fate. That's a shame. In these trembling hands, my faith tells me to react. I don't care. So it's all about a guy who wants change. So this is my little just tidbit for
Your
the
little plug. It almost feels a little. It almost feels a little No Country for Old Men, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's like
yeah, the
like a
coin.
coin flip. Like it's got the resigning yourself to the flip of the coin or the roll of the dice. That's yeah.
Yeah. And just on a kind of a last couple minutes here, there's even big bands, for example, Public Image Limited, which was Johnny Rotten, Johnny Linden he got his whole inspiration from Muriel, I don't forget her last name, but her book is called Public Image Limited. Harry Styles, Watermelon Sugar, that's from a book by Richard Brodigan, just called Watermelon Sugar, and he just thought it was a cool name. So you're getting references, like kind of little bits in here that aren't really maybe songs based on it, but they just kind of will take a line.
A turn of phrase, yeah. And I mean, anything can be an inspiration, right? You can build a whole concept album around a book or a story or a person, or you can just be pulling these little tidbits, which I think shows the breadth of influence that artists have. It's like you never it
Yeah,
might be a painting on a wall, it might be
yeah,
a
exactly.
a name on the back of a paperback. Like it's those influences are coming from everywhere, and some choose to use little fragments and piece together their own vision for a song, and other people literally like take entire worlds and put them in music. So there's that a wide range of how those influences come to be.
Definitely, definitely. Well, Seth, is there a book that you would? I mean, we're talking about songs and music, of course, but is there a book that you would recommend that would, out of this whole list, that you think people should read to understand the song better?
I mean, let's see here. I'm going to take another peek at the list. I do think, just given sort of the commitment to the theme, I think 1984 is sort of the obvious one to me. And I think it probably will help you understand a lot of Bowie stuff beyond the surface level and kind of almost get into a little bit of how he thinks and what things were driving his creative process at the time. Plus, it's a relatively, I mean, it's such a famous book. It's not an insanely difficult read. And it'll bring you back to junior year of high school a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. You can meet me at the coffee shop, right?
yeah,
And so we'll have safety in numbers.
yeah, there you go. Scott will bring a copy for you. He's always got
Yeah,
extras. So
no Kindles, dude. No Kindles. I'm talking like dirty paperback book.
you want to smell those old bookstores, smell the pictures, right? Yeah.
Oh, well, everyone, listen. Again, I hopefully Seth and I have inspired you to go to the library or go onto Amazon and or go into your basement back in it with all those books you have
Yeah,
and pull.
and keep your eye and also just kind of be thinking about like when you hear a song, maybe examine it with a closer eye and just kind of you may be able to find like, wow, that's a reference that sounds too literary to be new. Maybe it is inspired by
Yeah,
something else. And there's probably so many examples that we didn't touch on
yeah.
in this podcast of that overlap happening. And so if you've got thoughts of things we missed, as always, please reach out and tell us what we need to dig into. If we missed any good music or any good books associated with it, we always like to learn more about that stuff.
Definitely, definitely.
Scott will read the books. I will listen.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And can I put a plug in, Seth? Can I put my own plug in?
Of course.
I've also written some books if you guys ever want to know about them.
This
I
is
don't
true.
ask Seth because I don't think Seth has read them, but he inspired me, and I actually have him in the notes, everyone. But
Yeah, no, we're to do it. I think that's a good plug. And we'll be tracking Scott's Amazon movement on these books. So please download, subscribe, like, etc.
Yeah, please. Please just leave a
Get
good
some
review.
traction on these bad boys.
I will pay for reviews. So just let me know if that's an option for you guys. Hey, one last, I just want to call out, I just want to say thanks to my good buddy Jay. I just got to see him, and he's got a really cool son who's wants to be a writer. So I got to talk with him. So hopefully, Jack, if you're listening, I encourage you to write. And as you can see through all these books here that have influenced some of the greatest artists of the day, anyone can write. And Seth, I know you're going to do some poems soon. So buddy, we'll all be in the publishing game.
Absolutely. Gotta get a little bit of that sweet publishing down. Yeah.
Everyone listen, hey, have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good.